Welcome to the Down South Hunting Podcast. This is Adam Cruz and Mike Higman. Mike, how you doing tonight, sir?
Man, I'm doing really good. I'm really excited about our guest tonight. Kind of something we threw together last minute, but I'm excited to have these guys on.
Yeah, I don't think we actually recorded this. We've already had the call, everyone, just so you know. But I told the guys, Aaron and Zach, that I would happily carry their tree stands and happily set their tree stands up for them on each individual hunt if they would just take me a few times this year. So you can say that I'm kind of a big fan.
So just in case we have any listeners that are Alabama fans and can't read, who are you talking about with Aaron and Zach?
Dude, do not make me try to pronounce their last names. You've already nailed it. You go for it. Do it.
Aaron Warbritton and Zach Ferenbaugh.
Okay. Of the
Not
hunting
Bach.
public.
That's right. That's right. So you might know their names from Midwest Whitetail. And they started a new gig called The Hunting Public, where they're going to be doing online video, podcasts, basically information about hunting. They got a lot of notoriety. I don't know if a lot of notoriety, but people should know them from last year on Midwest Whitetail. They started doing a public land hunting. What they did was called?
That was like the public land bow hunting, or no, the public land hunting blog off of Midwest Whitetail.
Yeah, and they did some separate videos where they're hunting on public land, which I think is relatable to a lot of people in the South. Even if you hunt a private lease or some private land in the South, I think it's a lot more relatable than somebody hunting a big ag farm in Iowa. Is just, they're in Iowa, so there's big bucks, which is cool to watch. But it's not just sitting over a cornfield or a soybean field. They're out there scouting and finding, funnels and finding bedding areas and that kind of stuff. So in this episode, we get to ask them a ton of questions. If you're not familiar with Dan Infalt and the Hunting Beast, it might be a little overwhelming, some of the topics. But if you kind of break it down and just plug little things into how it relates to your hunting area. And I think the overall thing for me is just learning to think differently than what you see on TV.
I would 100% agree. And going back to the whole relatable topic, I've said a few times on the podcast, I went through a period, like a dry spell of kind of being burnt out on whitetail hunting just because, everyone's chasing that big buck. Everyone's sitting in that box blind over a cornfield. And not everyone has that. And there for a while, I just didn't have the private land to hunt close by to home. And I just kind of got to a point where it just wasn't as fun. It was almost like I was competing with people on TV, which kind of sounds silly, but I'm very competitive. And I think a lot of people might get in that same boat. But once I started getting kind of plugged into people like Aaron and Zach and Dan Infalt, John Eberhart, these individuals that are hunting on public land, doing it DIY, going places where anyone can go, it was almost like a whole new aspect to hunting that I haven't experienced in the whitetail woods, and that's like adding adventure in. It's like something completely new. And I think if everyone will take in a lot of these tactics and strategies that Aaron and Zach talk about, it's just something new, and just look at it as a brand new adventure and a way of doing things outside the box where you might be used to the way you might be used to doing things.
Well said. So before we get into the interview, Adam, what do you got going on with hunting? Have you been hunting in the last week? Are you going hunting next week? What's up with that?
Well, last weekend, I actually had my little boy, my 10-year-old. He was certified with his hunter safety course. And we've had a hunt plan. He drew a quota hunt for Land Between the Lakes up on the Tennessee and Kentucky border. And I thought it was at the end of October. So I was talking to my uncle who we're going to go with and camp with. And I was talking to him yesterday. And he said, you ready to go? And I was like, yeah. We was talking about our plans. And he said, and I said, I'll call you on the 27th. He said, son, you better not call me on the 27th. It's this weekend. So I'm actually going to take my 10-year-old on the juvenile hunt this weekend, which I just had my dates all wrong. My boss worked with me. So taking off Friday, gonna go scout that place out. I've already done a lot of aerial scouting, and my uncle's been there a bunch of times, and he already has a good lay of the land, so that'll be even better. But it'll be my first time to go. I'm excited about it. Excited to get my little boy in there and hopefully get his first deer. How about you?
Awesome, man. So I've heard of that place. I've heard, pretty decent pressure there, but
Hmm.
a lot of really good deer. Does that seem about right?
On the Kentucky side, they're really known for having some really good deer. Tennessee side, there've been some good deer killed, but like you mentioned, there's generally a lot of pressure. And I'm not sure how much we're going to face because it's a quota hunt for juveniles. Hopefully, not too much. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's just a lot of property, a lot of public land. It should be really a lot of fun for the kid, to get him out there and camping and hunting. If nothing else, if he gets too bored, we'll do some speed scouting, as Aaron and Zach will talk about a little bit.
So what's your strategy with hunting with him? I mean, are you going to hunt out of a ground blind or on the ground? How's that going to work?
Yep, I've got a ground blind, a couple of nice little Primos chairs, and so far, unless my uncle points me in a different direction of where might be like a historically good spot to hunt, I've went into this aerial map and I break it down into a hybrid version of aerial and topo, and I've went and circled some saddles that are not too far off the beaten path where he won't get too worn out, and hopefully won't be overrun with hunters. And I feel like hunting in some of these or outside of some of these saddles might be good areas for deer, traveling to and fro. So hopefully that'll pay off.
Is this basically brown is down hunt, doe, spike,
Oh
buck,
yeah.
whatever he's shooting?
Oh yeah, man. Hopefully he'll get him a small little buck or whatever comes by, whatever makes him happy.
Yeah, man. Well, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Um, Speaking of that, I've been trying to get my aunt and uncles ready some for the kids coming up too. This weekend I was able to put up a ground blind and a double ladder, so I'm trying to get things ready for them to just be able to come enjoy the woods with me. But I did get to do a little bit of hunting this weekend. I got two hunts in. I think it was Friday night. I got set up pretty late because I worked Friday. Came out there, and when I got in, while I'm getting set up in the tree, I had a doe kind of run in from, of course, not the direction I was really expecting. This is a spot I'd never hunted before. I just walked through it once earlier during the year, and she was downwind of me, and I think she caught a little bit of wind. So I guess what I learned this weekend is I, in fact, do have some scent. I do need to worry about my scent. So those ones did not sent me last weekend, but this weekend she caught a little bit of wind and she worked downwind of me, and so within like 15 minutes of being in the sand, I had a deer blowing. She ran off, was blowing back in the woods, and she kept blowing. So what I realized though is I had not dropped any of Dan Infolt's magical milkweed seed yet.
Mm.
So I think maybe that was my problem, is I hadn't dropped any milkweed yet to take care of my scent. So I went ahead and did that, and no sooner did I drop some, it was probably 30 seconds later, a deer literally came running out of the swamp near me. So
It's
I guess
'cause
I'm just going to start dropping milkweed more often. That's how that stuff works, right?
it definitely, but it has to come from Dan. I'm not really sure it'll work if it comes from anyone else. It's just my
Yeah.
opinion.
Well, I was fortunate enough. Mine actually did come from Dan. I didn't have any, and he was offering on the website if anybody just PayPal him some money for shipping. So uh, I haven't been able to kill any big bucks with it yet. So this other deer that came out was a button buck, and the spot I was in was the wind was kind of swirly, so he actually got real nervous, and it was kind of funny to watch. It must have had to do something with the way the wind was swirling, but he thought he had me pegged in like a tree that was like 20 yards away, stomping at the tree and staring at it. And anyway, he stuck around though, ended up feeding off finally. Didn't see any other deer that night. Then the next morning went hunting again, went in blind, and it was, man, it has been hot. I'm sure most people can relate. It was like when I left the truck in the dark at like 6 in the morning, it was 72 already. So sweating, getting in the stand, finally get set up, and of course I didn't see crap. And like I said earlier, I had a bunch to do to get ready for the kids coming up later next month, and I wanted to get a little bit more seed out. So I got down at 9 o'clock and go back to the truck, load all my stuff up in the truck, and I get in the truck, turn the truck on, and I was trying to figure out what my plan was going to be the day. I think I was looking at my phone, and I look up, and like 100 yards in front of me on the road I'm parked on with my truck running, there's 4 does in the road. So
Oh man.
I didn't see anything.
Oh.
But I something I heard said that I like to follow is you never want to give them a free pass. So I figured, well, I might as well figure out something to do here. So I waited till they all kind of went off in the brush, and I got out of my truck, got my bow and everything, slowly closed the doors, and I walked as fast as I could down to this fire trail that I knew that they were heading towards. So went down to there, and I like slowly tried to stalk up and find these deer. And unfortunately, I came out right where they had gone in the woods. So I somehow I missed them. So I decided I'm gonna give it one more shot and was walking slowly back towards that fire trail I started at. And I actually they caught me moving, and I heard one of them just do like a quick little snort, and it bounded off like 10 yards. But I knew there was a bunch of them, and I heard one bound off another way. So I thought, they're probably going to try to get downwind of me. So I like did this big loop and went downwind of them like by a long shot and started working my way back up real slow. And I knew they'd already be kind of alert because one of them already seen me. And I actually got to the point where I actually saw one through the bushes, and it was staring right at me. And I was like, unfortunately, I was like right out in the middle of the open there. So it had me pegged. I just basically stood there, held my bow in front of my face, and it just kind of kept an eye on me and started feeding a little bit. But what I noticed is it started feeding towards me. And I think it wanted to get close enough to see what I was. So I like crouched down when it was behind a tree and got all crouched down. And this thing like fed within, it was probably 25 yards of me. But I was like crouched down, like had no way of getting any kind of shot or anything. And, it did the whole head bobbing, stomping, all this kind of stuff, which got the attention of the other does. But all this is upwind of me. So I, felt like there's maybe still a chance. This doe started to move around downwind of me, which, had to circle around probably like 50 yards. And as it was going, finally it got behind some stuff. And I like got up real quick and got, tried to stand behind a tree. And I was just like so in the open. These other does were seeing me. But I'll just end the story quickly. It got to the point I got full drawn on this doe, and there was just too much brush in the way. It was only like probably 20 yards away. I thought maybe it was going to be able to make it happen chasing these does down. It was a really fun hunt. No giant buck or anything like that, but it was exciting to at least try to do. So I just love getting out in the woods, and it was definitely worth giving it a shot. You never know what could have happened.
We're both not fans of the University of Florida football. And the whole time you're telling me that story, all I could imagine was this dude from Florida running around in his jorts chasing a deer with his bow. And so that's the big joke with Tennessee fans against Florida fans is, they're always in their jorts, their cutoff jeans. So that's how I imagine you chasing this deer with war paint on.
Yeah.
Sorry,
that
man,
is how I hunt, actually.
I don't know how I got there, but
jorts and a thermocell. Those are what's necessary for hunting in Florida.
I bet, man. Whew, gosh.
But they got to like have the pockets showing, man, because you got to have the pockets hanging out the bottom. It's hot down here. You can't be having shorts hanging all the way down to your knees.
No, but this is a family friendly show, so we probably should stop there.
Yeah. All right, man. You think we should go ahead and get this interview? Because I think probably most of these listeners are tired of hearing us talk.
For sure. Let's get started.
All right, man. Let's get him on the line. All right. I'm really excited. We've got on the line Aaron Warbritton and Zach Ferenbaugh of the Hunting Public.
Ferenbaugh.
Ferenbaugh. Okay, we're going to leave that this time, guys. At least I got your first names right this time.
Yeah, no problem.
I think the new tradition of the Down South Hunting podcast is going to be me messing up the beginning of the show, and us being too tired of redoing it to edit it out. So we're just going to go ahead and leave this in. So Zach Ferenbaugh. Yeah. But I got your show right. It's the Hunting Public. That's right?
Yeah, right.
All right, sweet. And you guys started that, what, what is it, 3-4 weeks ago now?
I don't think it's been that long. I think it's probably been about closing 2 weeks. On 2 weeks, I believe.
You guys have been cranking out so much content. I guess it seems like it's been like a month's worth. You got, I don't know like how YouTube and all that stuff ranks. I know you have a ton of YouTube videos out. I know your podcast is already way ahead of ours in iTunes. You've got what else do you guys got out there? Of course your social media is blowing up. So obviously things are going well so far. Also, besides you, of course, we got Adam on the line. So I just want to tell you guys, welcome to the show. Welcome to Down South Hunting Podcast. Adam, what do you got to say?
Yeah, within the short amount of time that you guys have been producing content, y'all are at the top of my list of YouTube subscriptions. So anyone that's out there listening, I would highly recommend it. I think I've watched every video you guys have cranked out and every podcast I've listened to. So good job.
Thanks.
Awesome. It's entertaining, good storytelling, better than anyone else that's out there that's doing the YouTube thing, in my opinion.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Obviously, the Down South Hunting Podcast, we try to focus a little bit more on southern guests and this type of habitat and stuff, but we want to make exceptions for guys like you where, I think we share the same passion, just different geography, and the fact that you guys are so into public land and just maybe a different style of hunting, and I think there's a whole lot you can offer. So I'm excited about getting into some tactics and strategies. But before we do that, can you kind of give us a rundown of what the hunting public is, how you guys decided to do it, and maybe what you see in the future as far as like content and what you guys are going to be putting out? I guess just to make it simple, we'll start with Zach and then we'll go to Aaron.
Are you sure? Are you sure you don't want to go first, Aaron?
All right, we're going to start with Aaron, and then we'll go to Zach.
All right, the hunting public's only been around now for a couple weeks, like you said, and it's an idea spawned from myself, Zach Ferenbaugh, and Greg Clements. Basically, we wanted a show that featured public land hunting, but also didn't necessarily pigeonhole just to public land hunting. The hunting public is more of a general phrase, almost like in politics you might be referring to the general public, the general population. Well, this is the general public of the hunting population. That's the hunting public. That's what we're going for there. We just want to be able to appeal to all average hunters. That's pretty much it, because that's exactly who we are, and we're never going to change that. We both came from backgrounds hunting public land and some private land, small farms, on permission, as most of your listeners, I'm sure, have. And we just want to appeal to those people. We want to create a community of those people, because it seems like that they don't have the biggest voice within the hunting industry. It's a lot of I don't really know how to put this kindly, I guess. It's hunting is turned in, especially whitetail hunting, is turned into a big money game, where money buys antlers, and antlers is what people measure their success by, and we want to change that narrative. We at the hunting public, we like to have fun. We like to kill deer and be out there with our friends and our family. And I know that sounds pretty cliche, I guess, but that is really who we are. When one of us shoots a deer, it doesn't matter who kills it. Everybody is involved. It's a total team effort, and that's what I want to build as a community with the hunting public. Is more, we want to bring back that social aspect of deer hunting that we've lost in the last 15, 20 years. So that was kind of the whole idea behind that, and then all of our content spawns off of that idea, and that's why we hunt so much public land ourselves, and And we also have a private land segment on the show too, with guys hunting small properties and hunting on permission and stuff. So, and they're of the same mentality that we are. You know, they love being out there with their friends and their family. And when somebody shoots a deer, it's this big social event. You know, everybody comes over to help get it out of the woods. It's just really cool to try to bring that stuff to light with through media, you know, and show folks that it's not just about you and killing big bucks. It's about, you know, other people too that you enjoy being out there with.
Well, I think it's really cool that you guys are. I've heard so many times people say, "I wish there'd be a show where they just do it like people do for real, and you know they don't go out and kill a buck every time." And I think it's really cool that you guys are making a run at this, and I'm really interested to see how this all works as far as you know, making the show successful and making a business out of it. Zach, you got anything to add to what Aaron had to say about that?
No, I think he did a good job explaining it. No, the thing that I'd like too is I guess my favorite thing about it is just the social aspect of it. Hunting is fun, and I think that sometimes people get too caught up in the competition side of it when in reality the reason that everybody started hunting is because they enjoy it. It's fun. It's fun to go out with your friends and family, like Aaron said, and just have a blast out in the woods. That's what we love to do. So that's our main goal, really.
Was there ever a moment in time where you guys can look back and think maybe that you might have also gotten caught up in the competition side of hunting? And is it a possibility that your mindset and the way you hunt now and even creating the hunting public had something to do with that particular situation?
I don't know if there's necessarily one individual moment. There's a whole pile of moments, I'd say, over the last 10 years. But go ahead, Zach.
Well, it's just, you know, we always have hunted as a group. You know, as long as I've lived in this area, we've hunted as a group, and we just really enjoy that aspect of it. You know, it's not just, you know, one guy going out and holding his spots from the other guys. I mean, we're always talking about our, you know, options, where we can go, and we're making plans as a group, not just, you know, individuals. And I don't know, it's always kind of just been the team aspect is what we've liked. So I don't necessarily know if there was a moment. It was just kind of what we've always liked to do, is hunt as a team, and it's just kind of built off that, really.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I guess if there was a moment for me, it was a long time ago, you know, before I even moved up to Iowa and started working for Midwest Whitetail. It was back in 2009 or 2010, and I was having a tough season and had passed some bucks that I was disappointed that I passed, you know, and I ended up shooting a buck, and I was like disappointed in how big he was. And I don't know, I got into the house and everybody was congratulating me, and I was just kind of a butthead about it. And I got to thinking about it that night. I'm like, man, this is ridiculous. Like, this is stupid to even worry about how long a G2 is or any of this crap. Like, who cares about any of that? Like, and then when you start hunting public land with your friends and you're kayaking in somewhere, I mean, if you go all the way back in there and you start seeing deer and deer sign and a buck shows up, like, you don't even care how big he is. You just want to get an arrow through the thing so that you can give him a kayak ride out of there. You know, I mean, that's really what, like, to Zach's point, that's why we all started hunting in the first place. And that's what we kind of have done with our mentality over the years, is we always think, like, man, remember how much fun you had when you were learning to deer hunt and when you were a kid. And now if you try to make it all about antlers and age and all this stuff, you know, these individual goals, you put so much pressure on yourself that you quit having fun. And that's the whole reason why you started hunting in the first place for most of us. Not to say that we don't try to harvest mature bucks. We do. But we want to be able to appeal to everybody. You know, we don't just want to appeal to the high level guys that are hunting a deer for 5 straight years or whatever. We want to be able to show kids, you know, like, go out with your friends on public land and see some deer and read sign and, yeah, try to have fun.
is can't remember what I was just going to ask you about that. Let me ask about. Oh, here's what I want to talk about. Good thing I'm going to be editing this. I can take this out. Um, do you guys have a plan as far as being able to monetize? Is this how you're going to be supporting yourselves and going forward? Do you guys have sponsors lined up for doing this? Obviously, you don't want to get caught up in where most of the industry is at, where all it is talking about specific products, and it's you're not getting into hunting, but obviously you got to make a living as well. Do you have something you guys can share as far as how that's going to work at all?
Yeah, well, we actually. Go ahead, Zach.
Yeah. We're our hunting as of right now is kind of the secondary thing. We're not making any money off of it, but we're going to do more production work in general within the hunting industry and hopefully without out of the hunting industry as well. And focus our efforts on that. And
that's a different company that we own.
Oh, right. Okay.
Technically, the Hunting Public is a brand that we own underneath of our mother production media company, and that is called the Woods Guys. And
which I've seen on the bottom of your videos.
Yep, the Woods Guys, and that's our production company, media company. We do a number of different things for. Like Zach said, basically anybody that's into outdoor recreation, any brand out there that is needing media work done, we want to work with those brands. And we are, like, that's what's supporting us. That's basically our job. Mm-hmm. And the Hunting Public is kind of just our side project that we're working on to try to build. And, to your point, we don't know about the whole sponsor thing yet. I mean, Zach and I have been down that road with Midwest Whitetail, and you meet a lot of great people that way, and it's not a bad way to go. But as you said, if you start getting too many sponsors, you start diluting the value of your content.
Right. You end up with a 15-minute commercial and 5 minutes of content I'm sure you got to keep everybody happy, I'm sure. So, the good thing is, though, I think if you guys keep putting out the kind of stuff you're putting out now, there's going to be enough demand for it where you might be able to kind of decide how you want to run sponsorships and that kind of stuff. And like you said, if you got a separate media company to help pay the bills, I think there's a ton of potential for what you guys are doing. If there's enough demand for it, and I think a lot of people are tired of a lot of the stuff that's out there, it'll work. So I'm excited about it. That's why I really wanted to get you guys on and start talking about this early. I think there's potential for this to get real big.
We hope so.
Oh, hopefully.
We just wanted to make something cool at first. Like, we'll worry about monetizing it later.
Yeah.
We just wanted to have something cool that people could relate to, and then if it turns into something, it turns into something. We've got some lofty goals with it, but that's where, that's the first step, is just creating something that is valuable to people, like us.
So we didn't bring you on just to talk about the Hunting Public. We really want to get into talking deer hunting. So Adam and I had texted back and forth a little bit, and I think we came up with about 5 hours worth of questions we wanted to talk to you guys about. So we'll go ahead and get into it. And I hope you guys.
We can probably talk for 5 hours on that.
hope you guys
we gotta sleep at some point, but yeah.
Yeah. We're so I guess I'll just start asking some questions. I'll let Adam's got a bunch too. I guess the first thing though, did you guys get to go hunting tonight or today? Anything you can tell me with that?
Yeah, I went tonight. I actually went out by myself and did an observation sit this evening, and saw a handful of bucks, and I think a couple of shooters. We got like the same wind for the next 3 or 4 days, and it's supposed to be pretty average, mild temperatures. Definitely not great deer hunting weather by any means, but I guess our line of thinking there was if we went out and we observed tonight and we observed a buck, doing a specific thing, he's going to have the exact same conditions for the next 4 days. So the hope is that we can go in there tomorrow or the next day on the same wind and be able to get tighter to one of those bucks that I watched tonight. And I don't think Zach, did you go?
No, I didn't, but hopefully in the morning going to.
Hopefully we don't keep you up 5 hours talking about our questions. Can get up in the morning.
It don't matter. We don't sleep anyway.
Yeah.
Before we get into more questions, I do want to say so there haven't been a ton of episodes out lately, but one thing I already saw that I love that you guys did is you guys went out to hunt the buck nest. And I guess if we have any listeners that maybe aren't familiar with who you guys are, maybe they can start with last year's Midwest Whitetail public land hunting blog and kind of get a feel for where you guys were at. But you guys went out to the buck nest, and one of the things, Aaron, you said was, looks like we've had some other guys out here, and we've put a lot of stuff out. It seems like it's getting some more attention this year. And you basically said, bring it. If you want to come out here and try it, based on what you've seen, then you're welcome. Come on and do it. I thought that was so cool. I definitely would not probably be saying that, but I think it's cool that you're embracing the whole public aspect of it. And like, hey, this is the same, we're hunting the same place. You could come out and do it. And, it's not just for saying, I mean, you actually can come out here. So I thought that was really cool. Not to sound too Chris Farley-ish of, hey, remember when you said, but I just wanted to point that out to our listeners.
Yeah, we want people out there. That's one reason why we do it. We want to see people out there using the resource. Most folks in Iowa or wherever you're from are paying for that, that public land. And if it's not getting used, then someday it's not going to be there. So I don't mind seeing people out there hunting it.
That's cool.
We have very few negative interactions out there with other hunters.
Well, as far as pressure goes, it definitely makes it you guys have to step your game up. Because, I mean, once you find a real good spot and you put it out there a whole lot, you make it a whole lot easier for other people to find it. I've thought watching some of the episodes, like, man, they're still showing a lot of where that's at. And I'm sure some people have figured it out. And I think it's cool that you've, basically said, yeah, that's the way it is. And they can figure it out and come on out here and see if you can get them if we can't. So it'll definitely change some things with pressure. Is there something that you guys have done? Are you trying to plan ahead for that at all? Like, oh, we know that people are going to come in this way once we show it, so we know this second spot we can go to. And, I mean, I don't think that's cheating at all. I mean, all of us that hunt public land are always trying to account for pressure. Is that something that you're able to do at all?
Yeah, we have lots of secondary options when we go into spots. I wouldn't say that's necessarily the exact reason for it. There's probably a number of reasons. But when we go into any location, we've got a plan B, C, D, so on and so forth. And if we get to the first one and scout it and it's not, the sign's not there, or there's been pressure, or the wind switches or whatever, then we can just keep going and go to a different spot. We rarely go in with all of our eggs in one basket going into the season on one place.
Yeah, I think I think also with even like the buck nest, spots on public land are come and go. Some years you'll get a group of out-of-staters come in and hunt the area real hard, and then the next year they're not there. Or, places are good for the early season, but then get hit hard in the rut, or late season, or whatever. It's always, not every spot's going to be exactly the same every year. I mean, pressure is just going to change inevitably. So, yeah, like Aaron said, we've always got, a backup plan for our backup plan, basically. I mean, it's just a lot of bouncing around. We also scout for pressure too. So just always looking for the places that are, where people aren't going.
And maybe it'd be a good idea to kind of take a step back too. I've heard you guys talk in other places about I think it was probably a couple years ago where you kind of had a philosophy change with your hunting, and maybe it was a more gradual thing, but it seems like especially last year there was some changes in the way you guys did things versus the typical Midwest whitetail thing. Can you maybe talk about how you came to that, what your changes were and how you got to that point of doing it? And I guess we'll let Zach go first on that one.
You mean like our time frame focus? Is that what you
More
mean?
like trying to hunt
season?
buck bedding and that kind of stuff, as opposed to destination food sources. Is that, I guess,
Yeah, right. No, that makes
with that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, we never, while hunting public land, we never were able to hunt destination food sources. I mean, we were always, at the very least, hunting a transition between a food source and a bedding area, but we were always focused around bedding areas, but we generalized bedding areas. We were just getting closer to thick cover and just would see a deer bed and not really think too much about what deer was there, what wind is bedded there or on. And then we actually came across Greg Litzinger on YouTube, and he was talking about hunting buck beds in the mountains of New Jersey, and I thought it was really interesting, and it was something that I'd never really heard. Some of the things he was talking about were things that I'd never heard about. So we talked to him. We did a podcast with Greg, and then he told us about Dan Infault, and then we talked to Dan, I think, the following week, and that's when we really started focusing on those buck beds, just because those guys opened our eyes to it and made it clear of how they were doing it and what they were looking for. And then we just kind of just started trying it, and it definitely has paid off. We definitely have more buck encounters than we did when we were hunting just generalized bedding areas.
You got anything to add to that, Aaron?
Yeah, that's 100% correct. I mean, we a lot of light bulbs started coming on through those conversations, and since then, we have a large following and a lot of support from the huntingbeast.com. That's Dan Infault's website, and that's because we've openly mentioned them all the time, because we credit them with a lot of our success. We learned a lot of that stuff from those guys, from Joe Elzinger and Dan Infault and Greg, and then all the other members on the Hunting Beast. Very knowledgeable people. I think, in my opinion, they are collectively, they're the most knowledgeable group of whitetail hunters out there. Those folks on that forum. And I don't even think it's close. But everybody hears buck bedding anymore, and it almost, the two camps are getting more and more divided all the time. It's like these guys are bed hunters over here, these guys are funnel rut hunters or destination food source hunters or food plot guys. But one thing I will say for Zach and I is that we've done both at this point. We've hunted using either one of those tactics, and I think that's a good thing. If people will just open their eyes to trying new things all the time, they're going to become better hunters. Don't pigeonhole yourself into thinking that you've got to go and scout and find the best pinch points on a piece of public land and then wait till the rut to go hunt them, because you're going to walk in there and you're going to see two other guys sitting in a tree standing there. Because if you can see that pinch point on an aerial photo, pretty likely that somebody else can see it too. But whenever you start thinking about how bucks bed with wind advantage, and basically how their mindset works, and how they have to adapt to survive, especially on public land when there's hunting pressure out there. It's just crazy the situations that you find that these bucks put themselves in as far as bedding and travel and all that stuff. And if you're not thinking about that, then it's going to be a lot harder to get on mature bucks on public land. You got to really,
I think it's going to be harder
to get in their head. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's going to be harder anywhere. I totally agree. Yeah, totally agree.
And Adam and I both talked about before, checking things out on the hunting beast, and it certainly has changed the way I've thought about hunting quite a bit. I personally am at a point where I'm struggling to, and I think a lot of people do this at different levels with how they're hunting. I'm struggling to plug how to most effectively take that buck bedding strategy into the type of terrain I hunt, where it seems to me, and I'm sure Dan Info would walk through my woods and see it differently, but to me, it seems like the bedding choices are so vast. So pinpointing specific areas is a lot tougher, but not impossible either. Like there's certainly more generalized areas. So I think the strategy as a whole applies. You just takes a different understanding to kind of plug it in your area. So I think a lot of people listening, I mean, all that information, you can definitely use it, and it just might take a little more creativity and that kind of stuff than, finding a tree standing out in a marsh, or, maybe some more obvious points, but they're definitely things to look for. So I like the challenge of it, and I definitely believe in the tactic as a whole. I just got a little bit more figuring out to do, I guess I'd say.
I'm thinking, Mike, now this is just my opinion. It feels like that's a little bit generalized, because if anyone's hunting, like Aaron and Zach are hunting, like I said, I watched all your guys' stuff. It looks like y'all are hunting some pretty thick stuff, probably some pretty big timber. Your bucks have a lot of different places they could bed as well. They have a lot of different choices.
Mm-hmm.
But as I watch your shows, you're like getting in there on those deer, like they're there. How are you pinpointing in such, broad and that's like some big timber woods. It looks like you're hunting.
Well, take the buck nest, for instance. There. I mean, the buck nest, all those bucks, when Zach and I were sitting there last year, they were standing up out in that field. And when people watch that, they're like, oh, that's crazy that those bucks, just bed in the same spot, all of them, for weeks at a time. Well, the fact is the buck nest is a big area. It's 1,000-acre chunk probably. And there's, I don't know, Zach, I mean, there's got to be 24 buck bedding areas on that place. There probably is.
Yeah, for sure.
We have learned where several of those locations are, and we were in the right spot that night, and there was a lot of thought that went into that and hunting that area. But this year, like I said, they're not there. So we're trying to find them, and they're scattered out on acorns, and they're in some of these other bedding areas. But that goes to your point, in all these locations, there may be a primary buck bedding area, but that's a rare thing to find. Most of the time, you've just got buck bedding areas that exist within a property, and it takes you a while to find those.
Yeah, I think with your question too, like you said, how do we know, or how are we pinpointing these places? One of the things that has happened for us is once we started nailing down a couple of these places, and we're like, man, that really seems like a good bedding area. Then we look at the features that are there. We look at the things like, okay, why would this one be here? And then you can take that other places. You can say, okay, in this same similar terrain or this similar vegetation type, they're probably, if we're looking for this, you kind of, once you see one, then you kind of just keep taking it to other places and just trying to find something similar. And you get to a point too, and Dan Infall talks about this too. You get to a point where you can just kind of guess, by looking at a map just based off of your past experiences. You can just kind of say, okay, that looks like this spot where we saw a buck, 2 weeks ago. Let's make a guess that there's going to be one there. And sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. But, you get to the point where you can just recognize those things once you've got some experience finding them.
Let me ask a follow-up question to that, because you hit on some things that I wanted to talk about, or I wanted you guys to talk about. So I know you guys are hunting multiple states. There's probably no way that you've been able to actually get your feet on the ground to scout all those places. But like you said, you're going off past history of where these bucks normally bed or would bed. What are you looking for as far as terrain is concerned and topography, and even maybe like hunter access? How do you put that all together? What are you really looking for at a Google Earth view or, topo view?
It's all so very situational, and every single area is so different. And that's one of the things that we are trying to, that's a way we're trying to approach our tactics with the hunting public, is we want to talk very situational tactics, because everywhere is different.
It's so hard to generalize It's so hard to generalize that.
And I apologize. I should have like got a little bit more specific. Let's say hill country first.
No, that's okay.
Like let's say like Middle Tennessee, Northern Alabama, that type of terrain where you got some rolling hills.
If you got rolling timber in Middle Tennessee, and Zach's familiar with this too, because that's how Southern Ohio is. You got rolling. Let's just say you've got rolling timber in there, and that's all you have. There's not much for transition. There's rolling timber, a lot of terrain. Bucks are going to bed a lot of times wind specific in that, to where if you have a ridge that runs down and it dumps off onto a bench and then on down into a steep ditch, bucks will bed out on the end of that ridge with wind blowing down the ridge to them, watching over top of the ditch. And most folks want to sit on top of the ridge where the sign is, with wind blowing away from the ditch, which is a wind advantage to them. That's just one example, and then the bucks, especially mature bucks, I don't know, Zach, you might agree with this. Mature bucks are going to rarely travel the top of that ridge. They're always going to cup around where that bench is, or the upper third, or even the lower third. I mean, sometimes it just depends on how the ridge is shaped and the hill is shaped, but they're rarely going to travel right down the center of that open ridge on the top.
Right. Well, and if they do, they're going to smell you, and you're never going to see them. If you're setting right up on top of them, blowing right down towards them. I mean, that's right. I mean, they're there for a reason, and they travel the way they travel. They're always keeping the wind at their advantage in hill country. I think more so than about anywhere, any other type of terrain. They use that wind coming over the hill to their advantage. That's the main focus in hill country, I would say, is just wind advantage.
Yeah, and what I noticed tonight, dude, too, down here, where we're hunting these river bottoms. Okay, so you've got a river bottom, and then on the north and the south side of the river bottom, you've got hardwoods, oaks. But there's a buffer on either side of the river that is just cuckleburrs and nasty crap for several hundred yards, and it's chest high. With perfect bedding cover. And those bucks still are bedding with wind advantage. Say, for instance, there's an oxbow in that river, and there is a point of oaks that dump off into that river bottom. They'll bed out, not in the oaks, but they'll bed off the point of those oaks, 50, 60 yards out in those cuckleburrs, with wind blowing out of the woods to them, facing the river. Yep. So they can watch that river with wind blowing in from the hardwoods, and then they stand up, and then they walk into the wind to go feed on those acorns. And they just swap sides of the river for different winds all the time. Right. Does that make sense?
And
that's a low area too, so you're getting thermals dropping down from the top as well. So you'll be getting wind coming off of the river, and then I would assume you're getting thermals that are coming down off of the top of the hills in the evening.
Well, in this situation, the wind is coming from the hills.
Okay.
The wind's coming from the hills to the deer that are bedded down in the river bottom.
Okay.
And they may have some thermal advantage down there, but probably not a lot. I noticed when I was in there tonight, when I observed them stand up out of their beds, they were in the exact spot where we figured they would be for these winds. But on my way out, I found a bunch of beds that were set up on my side of the river, because I was watching from the other side, from a distance, a good safe distance, 300 or 400 yards. But when I walked out, I noticed there was a bunch of beds that were set up for north wind bedding. And obviously tonight, us up here anyway, it was a south wind. So those bucks were all bedded for in southwind bedding tonight, and there was no bucks bedded in the northwind bedding, but I saw where they'd been there a bunch lately. You know, it's probably the same bucks, just swapping sides of the river.
I did want to touch on something real quick, that when we were talking about the buck beds specifically, I heard actually Dan Infolt say something recently that I thought was pretty interesting, because I think maybe I had somewhat of a misunderstanding, and he's when he said a lot of people have that same misunderstanding. A lot of like his best stories that he tells, and obviously being a podcast, a lot of people listening to this will have listened to a bunch of other podcasts with Dan Infolt. And a lot of his best stories are like a specific buck that he was hunting a specific bed and he knew where it was. And he said one thing that's kind of a misconception is, he said most of the time when he's hunting beds, he's not actually hunting like a specific buck in a specific bed. There's, you know, he'll know a big buck's in the area, but he's actually hunting bedding areas. He's not trying to nail the tree that the single buck is under. Yeah. It's like there's bucks on this island, or there's bucks off of this point, or it's not, you know, he's standing in beds to check wind bedding areas. And I think people just assume because he does that to get an idea of an area, like he's only hunting that one bed. But what he says is actuality, he's hunting the whole area.
That's exactly what we're doing also.
Right. And I think another thing is like sometimes people hear hunting buck beds, and they think that, you know, every time we go in, you know, obviously every time you go in, you hope that a mature buck's going to stand up out of that bed. But like a lot of times a year and a half old buck will stand up out of that bed, you know, and he just wasn't in that bed that day. You know, it's not like we believe 100% that a mature buck is bedding in that bed every single day of the season. It's just real specific times. And a lot of times, I mean, obviously a lot of times you're not right. It's always a guess. So I think.
Yeah. And where I was walking out tonight, I found 24 beds, you know, within a quarter acre out there. You know, you're not necessarily in that situation. You're not looking at one individual bed. Not to say that sometimes you won't be, you know, sometimes it is one individual bed. That they're using under a very specific set of conditions, you know. But yeah, tonight there was 24 beds out there where a buck is just, or a buck or any number of bucks have been bedded out there and just moving around. You know, the general area set up real well for bedding. Mm-hmm. So,
Adam, did you have anything to touch on where we were talking about that? I got kind of a different direction to go.
Yeah, I want to touch on one really specific question. So in episode 9 on your new series, you guys bumped a buck out of his bed on that creek bank. Now, you made the comment that by looking at the map, you guys were kind of thinking or speculating that there could be a buck bed right there. And so as I looked at that particular spot you were hunting, there was a decent little incline, it looked like, where, you know, the creek bed was there and maybe went up another 25 feet where the buck was bedded. How did you spot that on a map and think, you know, that's where a buck might bed? What gave you that clue?
Well, there's a lot of habitat that comes together right there. Go ahead, Zach. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, no. I mean, it was interesting that, like, I mean, I remember when we sat down that night, or the night before we were planning on going in there, it was funny. We ended up just, like, going right to the same spot. And, yeah, like Aaron said, I guess pick up back where you're saying, we just both got to that same spot because initially multiple habitat features come together right there. And then take it away, Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, we were looking at, you know, one of our, was it? Let me think. No, we were looking at topo and aerial, you know, and one of those hardwood ridges dumped off into that creek bottom, like I mentioned a while ago. And right where that ridge kind of petered out at the bottom is where it connected to the creek. But right there was also a lot of willows that you could see from the aerial photo. I mean, and we didn't know they were willows at the time. We just could tell that there was 2 or 3 different habitat types, you know, grass, you know, willow trees and hardwoods that all mixed together right there at that point. And right at the head of that point, you could tell in the creek that there was a rock bar there. So we're looking at that. We're like, they can cross right there at that rock bar. And a buck could bed there where all those habitat types converge with wind coming off the hardwoods, to the north. Because I'm sure when you saw that buck bust, you could see that the hill goes way up and there's bigger timber up above him. The wind's coming out of that timber to him right there. And he was supposed to be watching down the creek. It's when you're standing there in that bed, you can see all the way down that creek. But I don't know if he was just holding tight or if we woke him up. I'm not real sure. But right there where all of those, we talk about edge all the time and transition. Right there is a spot where multiple edge features converge.
And that creek crossing. So that's things I'd never even thought about, looking for that rock bed that you mentioned. So that, yeah,
most of the time on those creeks, when you notice a crossing, for example, people will want to hang right on the crossing, but in a lot of situations, those bucks are bedded within 40, 50 yards of those creek crossings.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you hang your stand there, you already bumped him out of his bed on your way in. You might have blown your hunt before you even got there.
That's a huge deal for us when we're scouting the rivers, looking for those crossings, because the deer isn't going to bed, at least in our theory, the deer isn't going to bed there unless he can escape across that river. And if it's too deep for him to cross, I mean, they will swim, obviously, but if there are crossings, if the river's low enough where there are crossings, if he can bed with one or even two crossings really close to his bed, I always feel like they're way more likely to bed there than if there is no crossing.
Yeah, and you pointed out in that video, it wasn't just the river being too deep where he'd have to swim or anything, but there was actually big rock bluffs on the other parts where he'd have to jump way down, I guess, if he was going to try to get across there. So that makes a lot of sense.
So have you guys hunted any type of islands off of like mainland, so where you'd have a shallow enough point for a deer to either walk across to get to the island or even maybe swim across? And I'm talking islands maybe like 100 yards wide and a mile long, skinny long islands or any smaller islands. Do you have any experience hunting those types of land features?
Sort of. Yeah. And it's just, I mean, they're great if the water, and they'll go through water, it has to make sense for the buck. And when you find the beds, you'll know if it makes sense for them or not. Because if the water's too deep, if there's not enough cover, if a predator can get at them in there on a specific wind direction, then they're not going to be there. So that's a more general answer to your question, I know, but that's what you're constantly looking for in there in those spots. Is can they escape, like Zach was saying.
Yeah, it's actually interesting you asked that. I just got off the phone with a friend of mine. He's hunting public in Minnesota. And he sent me a picture of the place that he's hunting. And he went in just a couple months ago, found a bed with rubs in it on a little island. And he told me that there's only two places that deer can get out. It's literally surrounded by water, and it's about 100 yards from the mainland. And there's only two places where the water's shallow enough, one on either side. And he said the buck's only bedding there on a north wind, because that's the only time he's seen him get out of there, both times on a north wind. And I don't know exactly how the spot sets up, but he has escape routes in either direction. And for whatever reason, like I said, I don't know exactly how the setup is, but for whatever reason, he doesn't bed there on a south wind. But both times my friend's been in there hunting with a north wind, he's seen him. When it's a south wind, he doesn't see him. So here's a situation where this buck is bedding all by himself out on a little island that's out in the middle of really wet habitat. And he's only got one way in, or, one way in from one direction and one from the other. And he's only bedding there on one specific wind. And I think that's pretty cool to see.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many variables with it. Maybe he just has a different favorite spot on the south wind, or maybe island's not good on the south. There, it is cool how you can spend so much time just thinking about why a deer would do something, and then when you're able to put it together, that's what makes it so cool when you're trying to hunt bedding areas, is you're really putting together a puzzle.
Yeah, it'll make you go about crazy.
But when it works out, like, I'm sure even like you guys didn't get a shot at that buck you got jumped the other day, but the fact that you were able to get so close and it turned out just you were in the right area and your speculation was right. I mean, that's a pretty cool feeling, and the fact that you got it on video makes it even cooler.
Well, we almost killed him the next night in the same spot.
And was that the dude? Was that where the other dude was like hunting right by you?
That was actually
night.
the same night we jumped him.
Okay.
We went right back the very next night, and we hunted the same exact bed, just from the other side.
Yeah.
Yep. And that buck was back in there again.
And was he in that same exact bed? I was thinking you guys said he was.
He might not have been in the same exact bed, but he was within 20 yards of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And he came in at last light, and dadgummit, me and Zach should have sat up. If we'd have sat up 20 yards closer to it, we'd have killed him probably. But we sat up exactly 100 yards from that little bedding area point that he was on, and it was just not quite close enough because he came in at last light. He actually bedded down at 20 yards, and we had to pull the entire set with the buck bedded there at 20 yards.
So what's the plan? You guys going to go back?
Do it.
Yeah. Are you going to go back now? I know you don't want to overhunt a spot, but I guess as long as he's still there, you almost have to just hunt there till he's gone, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, we wanted to go back in there the next day, but we had too much to do. We had to come back to Iowa. But yeah, I mean, heck, we would have been in there the next night right after him again if we weren't so busy. But yeah, I think, Aaron, you said that you were going to go back and try to look over that area, but you didn't even make it there because you saw too much buck sign tonight, right?
Yeah, I was on my way to observing that bottom tonight, and I didn't make it that far. I ran into too much other fresh buck sign, and I had to set my observation up a little bit different and saw some more bucks. So.
Okay, well, that's a perfect transition. It's like we're actually good at this or planned it, because that's the next thing I wanted to ask you about. Is a lot of what you're hunting at the beginning of the season now is hot sign. Can you kind of give us a rundown of what you consider hot sign and what you consider, what's worth paying attention to, and what should we just ignore? And I'll start with you, Aaron, since you just had that situation tonight.
We're paying, I guess, the later we get into the month of October, the less attention we're paying to some of it. But when it's late September and early October and we're seeing fresh rubs and stuff, we're paying attention to them. Especially if they're in a distinct line and you can tell that, it is a buck or any number of bucks going in and out of a potential bedding area. Because that'll tell you a lot. If there's, say for example, you got a big property, you got 10 buck bedding areas on it, and you've scouted the trails leading in and out of those bedding areas, those transitions. Because you look at a buck bedding area, a specific one, and then you think, okay, where's water, where's food, where's does, where's all these other things, so that you can link up each little area that they're going to be going to, So anyway, you got 10 buck bedding areas on a property. You go and you're bouncing from one to the next. Well, the one that's got the hot, fresh rubs leading into it is the one we're going to sit because we know that they're in there, or that they've been using it a lot more. When we went in and hunted the buck nest a week ago, the rubs, the sign just was not there that was there last year, and then our sit proved that they weren't in there. And that's not, you can't just take that to the bank because sometimes big bucks don't leave much sign. It just depends on the scenario. And in both of these scenarios that we're talking about here, we've got a large number of deer in these spots. More deer, more bucks, more sign. If you're hunting in Michigan and you got one mature buck on an entire area, he's not going to leave very much sign because he doesn't have much competition, and there's just not that many bucks to lay it down. So, yeah, I guess we're paying real close attention to sign that is close to bedding, or that is associated with the direction of travel that leads to bedding. That's how we found that Well, I mean, that's how we set up on that buck the second night. After we jumped him, me and Zach looped all the way around him, and then we're coming down an oak ridge leading towards that bedding area, and we started seeing rubs and fresh scrapes popping up on that ridge the closer we got to the bedding area. But here's the trick. About 150 yards from that bed, we quit seeing rubs. And we still knew that he was probably there, you know, and we went in and we set up, and sure enough, he came out of there. But I guess you pay a fair amount of attention to that sign, but it's not the end all be all thing. It's one piece that you need to look at. You know, if you've got scrapes that are located real close to bedding, then those are going to be really a great spot to hunt, especially in the next 2 weeks from now. You know, if you've got scrapes within 100 yards of bedding that are getting opened up right now, that's something that I would sit immediately.
So basically,
a buck's in there.
For somebody not listening on the day we're recording, which I'm not putting it out today, so nobody. This is like 2 weeks before the rut really gets going where you're at, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So basically,
last 2 weeks of October.
Yep. Last 2 weeks of October for your area, you know, would be the best time to be looking at that. Zach, what about tracks? Do you guys put much weight into just tracks in general?
Oh yeah. That's a huge factor. Something that I think you can really use to your advantage, especially after a rain. That's how Aaron decided to go into the area where he killed his buck last year, is based off of tracks that he cut going across a creek. And it's kind of the same deal as the rubs. You know, if you're seeing tracks go, big tracks going back and forth from a food source, or you know, even a transition between food and beds going towards a specific bedding area that you've scouted previously, or you just suspect bucks would bed, you obviously know that a big buck's going to be using that. And I think even a way to, you know, and even a way that we do that is just scouting the edge of a food source. Like there's crop fields on some of the public that we hunt around here. Sometimes we'll just take a walk around the edge, and if we see big tracks coming from the direction of you know, bedding area that we've scouted in the past, then we know that we got to push further in there. Tracks are super important, especially for a guy like me who doesn't have any trail cameras. I got to base everything off of tracks. Tracks and big buck sign.
Is that intentional? You don't have trail cameras?
I don't know. Kind of. Aaron has some, so I kind of bummed his a little bit, but I've just never brought myself to buy any. So
yeah.
But I like to bum Aaron's and use his information. But yeah,
that's easier to let him pay for them and run them anyway, right?
Right. I don't want to pay for them.
Yeah. So when you guys, okay, so I want to break this down a little bit more. When you're going into an area, are you saying, okay, tonight we're going to go into this, pick a size for me, like 1 or 2 or 400 acre chunk, and you're going into that area, and as you go in, you're scouting as you go, and when you hit the right sign, then you're like, okay, now we're going to narrow down, we're going to hunt this spot? Like, how often are you choosing a larger block and just scouting your way in versus, all right, tonight when we go in, we're going to get in this particular tree because we have this specific purpose? Zach, you can go first.
Well, new areas that we haven't hunted in the past, we're more likely to scout our way in, but also, like, we have goals in mind of, like, okay, we're going to scout our way towards this potential bedding area. If the sign's not there, then we move to this one. You know, we have a route in place, and then the goal is to not get sloppy with it. We actually just recently were talking about this. We kind of got sloppy a couple days ago and kind of got off our route and ended up going with the wind at our back, and then we ended up jumping a couple bucks. But the goal is to always scout our way into the wind towards these potential bedding areas, and that's when we're going to try to pick up the sign. Now, places where we're going to this specific tree or places that we've hunted in the past, and seen bucks come up out of those specific areas, that's when we're more likely to go in with a specific tree in mind, for example.
Aaron, you got anything to add on to that?
Yeah, and we're still even scouting on those too. If we're going in, and like we were talking about earlier, we may go into a spot with a specific tree, a spot that's proven. But as Zach stated earlier in the podcast, public land changes year to year all the time, and when we're going into those trees, we always have a backup plan, no matter what. So if we're getting close to that predetermined tree and we're not seeing the sign, many times we'll back out of there, or we'll go past it, and we'll just head on to the next one. That happens pretty frequently as well.
Mm-hmm.
Adam, I'll give you a chance to jump in here if you got something.
I see you guys are doing that a lot in the mornings. Are you worried about bumping other hunters, especially since you're on public land, or are you just kind of having to go with the flow since it is public?
A lot of the times, if there is somebody there, I guess, I don't know. When we go in the mornings, a lot of times we're obviously checking if there's anybody else parked in the area, or anytime we go hunting. That way we at least know, okay, there's likely somebody in this area or whatever. We're not necessarily going in to the same places where somebody's parked. It'd be hard for somebody to actually get there and park before us anyway in the mornings, but most times when we're going in deep, because a lot of times we try to get there so early that, the deer aren't even back into those areas, and that's why we're confident going in the dark and getting set up, and obviously making a fair amount of noise. In some instances, we're just hoping that those deer aren't even back into those bedding areas yet. So we're getting in there extremely early. I think in the mornings we've been up at 2:45 in the morning, so pretty early.
Yeah, that's pretty early.
Getting to the spot 3. Yeah, getting to the spot maybe an hour or hour and a half after that, and then starting to walk in then. So a couple hours at least before daylight is the goal, just to give ourselves plenty of time to get in there and pick something out and hang the set and, let everything kind of calm back down. That's the goal. Now, it doesn't always work out like that. Sometimes we still have managed to be late, but that's just...
Yeah, sometimes you're like me and you forget to reset your watch for daylight savings and you're sitting in the tree stand 3.5 hours before daylight.
That's funny.
I've heard that's a good camp trick. You change somebody's clock at your hunting camp. You get them out in their stand 2-3 hours early.
Oh, I totally did that. It's been many years ago, but I did it. Yeah, I was out there and I sat there forever. And I just watching the moon, overhead, and like, man, it's got to get light eventually. And then it didn't, and it didn't, and it didn't. And finally, it did. But I'd been there for a good several hours.
Oh man, Aaron, do you have any advice as far as navigating and getting set up in the dark? It seems like you guys do that a lot, and even scouting. But do you have any general advice about lights and that kind of stuff for getting around in the dark?
Yeah, lights and maps are a big deal, or GPS. We use that Huntera mobile map a lot on our phones because you don't have to have cell reception. And that's actually a real good option for aerial, or topo, I guess, because he's got both of them on there. But you can use that mobile map on your phone, and you don't have to have service. So, and it's going to show you exactly where you're at in relation to where you're going, just like a GPS would, except you've got, aerial and all that stuff on that map. So we're constantly using those in the morning, and we're always using our headlamps every time going in or out in the evening, for instance. we're firm believers anymore that deer cannot see those lights. So we just run them the whole time. We'll have those headlamps on for hours in the morning. Like last year when we were setting our stands before I shot that buck, me and Sean had both of our headlamps on for a good hour at the base of that tree. And going up the tree even.
Are you using a certain color? Or are you just using the regular light? Are you using like a green, red?
We have a green and white beam that alternates. And we use the green, some, but anymore the white's brighter and you can see more with it. And they still can't see it.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. Last year I heard you, I can't remember where it was, but talking about using the different colors, but then watching your videos this year, it seems like you just go blazing in there with the lights bright on and obviously have confidence. That's not going to ruin it. Yeah, that's really interesting.
It's got to be dark, though. That's the biggest thing. So many people will hear that, and they'll think, wow, these guys, really are on drugs. But, what tends to happen if you observe a deer, if you go out there, no weapons, obviously. You go out there, and this has got to be in a state where it's legal to do, and you shine a field with one of your headlamps. If you walk around out there with those deer and you're quiet and you're not making any noise, you'll notice that those deer quit paying attention to you. If you're making noise, they're going to stare in your direction. And many people associate that behavior with them seeing the light. Well, they're not seeing the light. They're hearing you, and they're staring in that direction just as they would during the day. If you break a twig during the day, that deer's going to stare over in your direction until it figures out what you are or aren't. It's the same thing at night. When you're making a bunch of noise gomming around through the woods with the light on and you come up on a deer that's staring at you, if you keep moving around, it's going to see you and it's going to take off, or it's going to figure out that you're a threat and it's going to take off. But that's what they're doing. If you're not moving and you're not making noise and you have the wind in your favor, they can't see that light. I mean, we've had deer walk within 3 or 4 feet of us in the middle of the night with them lights on.
So the other night when you guys were breaking your stands down with the buck bedded right there, at what point are you guys turning your lights on to get out of there?
Lights are on the whole time.
With the buck bedded just 20 yards away, just turn them on and start breaking the stand. I mean, obviously trying to not move in front of him.
Yeah, and we're not shining the light on him, because we've got weapons. So we're just using the lights to get out of the tree. But I watched the buck lay down right there at last light at 25 yards. And, of course, it's dead calm. So me and Zach just sit in the tree because we're going to hear him get up and move off,
Yeah.
We sat there for a good 45 minutes hoping eventually he'd get up and move off, but he never did. And every once in a while you'd hear him cough or something. He's still right there because it was crunchy and it was calm. You were going to hear him get up and take off when he's that close. So when we finally decided to go for it, we kicked those lights on and headed down the tree. And we just go so slow. If you make even the slightest noise, you just stop. And you wait for a couple minutes, and then you keep on going. And we got to the base of the tree and had all of our stuff on, and we're getting ready to head out of there, and we heard him stand up. So we just killed the lights, and we stood there, in the dark, and we heard him walk right by the tree, right in front of us. Just picking. It sounded like he was picking on acorns as he was going up the hill there. And then kicked the lights on, and out we went.
Significantly closer to us.
Oh yeah, he was within.
And just
he's walking by the tree.
He walked past us. Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you can see him in the dark, in the moonlight, walking by.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, they can't see those lights.
I did think you guys
they can see well in the dark. Yeah, they just can't see well in the dark in general, I don't think.
No.
I did think you guys are pretty hardcore, but maybe not as hardcore as I thought. Because if you guys really wanted it, you just would have stayed in the tree to wait until morning to see if he stayed
We've
bedded.
tried that.
Yeah.
We talked about it. It gets pretty cold out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've
Yeah.
tried that. We had one bed down next to us last year at the buck nest. Same exact scenario.
I remember that.
20 yards from the stand, you could just hear him down there chewing his cud, basically. And we sat there for a good almost 3 hours. We're like, man, we're just going to wait it out, and kill this thing in the morning. And, yeah, there's no way. So.
Could you imagine making it till like 5:30 in the morning and then he gets up and moves off?
Oh, man.
Yeah,
or worse, a dude
that's-
comes walking in.
Oh, yeah.
You've got to be pretty mentally tough to be able to do something like that. I mean, you'd
Well,
lose your
just like-
sanity out there all night.
Yeah.
Yeah, or like some sort of freak that doesn't get cold. Because, like, man, I remember last year I was like, Warb, let's do it, man. Let's sit here until daylight. Like, who cares? It's just one day of not sleeping, And then, like, 2 hours later, I was like, dude, we got to go. I'm so cold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard of guys doing that with box blinds before. They'll, go to sleep in the blind. I guess that might be a little more easier than sitting in a hang on all night.
Yeah.
That's what Winky did every time he went hunting was sleep.
Oh, no.
We'd just wake him up when the deer showed up.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess one other thing you want to touch on is bucks bedding on points and oxbows and that kind of stuff. Can you kind of give us an idea of the type of terrain you're looking for there?
Yes.
Zach.
On what are which
I guess
one are
I'm
the
giving
other
you two
points
things
or
there. So
oxbows?
maybe Zach, you can hit on what an oxbow is, and Aaron.
Let me
or
qualify
what-
that question a little bit more.
Yeah.
So why would a deer bed in an oxbow? And you can kind of tell what that is. Explain if you can.
Yeah, an oxbow is just like the horseshoe bend in the river. So, on the inside of that horseshoe, there's a lot of times there's going to be a bed on the inside of that horseshoe, and the deer is going to bed with the wind at its back, and it's going to be able to look right down that river on either side of that bend. So the thing that, like I was saying earlier too, when we scout these areas, we may walk to an oxbow, but it'd be super deep right there, and there's no way that deer is going to cross right there. So another thing that we're looking for, at least I always look for, is a crossing that coincides with an oxbow of the river. So, and it also can go the other way too. They're not necessarily always going to bed on the inside of that bend. Sometimes they'll bed on the outside of it with the wind coming from the land looking down the river. Because the river is obviously an open area that they can see a long way down. And if there's any predator coming up or down the river, they're going to see it. And honestly, likely there's not going to be anything coming down the river. Coyotes and stuff aren't going to just come swimming up the river trying to, get into a buck bed or whatever, a deer bed. There's a reason that they can bed there. They feel safe. And Aaron and I talk about it at least to each other all the time. Like, bucks love water. Seems like everywhere we hunt, we end up getting back to them bedding right up against a creek or a river or a lake or a pond or anything. So they're always using that water to their advantage, because if you think about it, most times a predator probably isn't coming from the water. It's coming from the land. And if they can smell all the land behind them and be looking over that water, they generally seem to feel pretty safe.
Whose buck was it last year that you guys got right on like a drainage ditch? It was during the rut, and he was cruising right along that water, and I think you guys felt like you were hugging it pretty close, but he actually like squeezed between you and the water. You guys remember which one I'm talking about there?
Yeah, that'd have been
Yeah,
Aaron.
that was the one I shot.
Okay. Yeah, you want to talk about that?
Yeah. Yeah, there was just a dike there, with basically a beaver slough that ran up through the middle of this marsh, and those beavers had, they've got that slough pretty deep, to where a deer won't hardly cross it. But right there where that dike is at is slightly raised, right next to that slough, and it's not but about 20 yards wide worth of water. But where it's raised right there, they can bed on specific winds, and they can look down that dike, and they can see any predator coming. If a coyote, for example, is coming up into that bedding area, he's going to have to walk down that dike. He can't swim across that water. At least most of the time, they're not going to. Or human, for example, human, bobcat, coyote, whatever. They're going to be coming in from one direction, and that's not to say that he can only get out of there one direction. He can get out of there multiple directions, but he's looking down that dike the same way that he goes in and out of that bedding area, and that's what he was doing. When we went and we hung the stands that morning, we saw the rubs going in there, and we kind of figured, if he's going to come out of that thing at all this morning, he's going to come down this edge.
How late in the day was that you got him?
8 o'clock, 8:15.
Yeah.
So that wasn't too late. So these beds, in relation to water, usually how close are they? Are they 5 yards off or 20 yards off or however far away they can get and still see?
Most of the time it's within 50, 60 yards, but not always. That buck tonight I watched rise out of a bed 10 yards from the water, and we see that often.
But I guess if you're obviously if it's 50 yards away, you're not just walking the edge of the water and finding buck beds every time. It could be 20, 30, 40, 50 yards off, which, you might not see it. But they can still see the water.
Yeah,
sometimes.
It's actually an interesting thing. So I said that they can see the water, but I've definitely seen beds that are like even 10 yards from the water, and I know they can't see out of them. Like, it's just so thick right there that they're bedding right up against that water.
The thing they always have that Zach talked about earlier is the escape. They always have the escape. So there's and that's usually what coincides with an oxbow in a river. Where it bends or meanders like that, the water usually slows down, and, dirt, rock, whatever builds up right there. So consequently, there's shallower water where those bends in the river are. On those long straight runways of the river is where you're going to have the deepest water anyway. So when they bed on those points on those oxbows out there on the river, they usually have escape, like creek crossings right next to them.
Yeah, and actually, how a lot of times, like really specifically how those crossings lay is like right at the biggest curve of the river. That's going to be the deep point. But like on either side of that curve, it's going to get a lot shallower. Because right when it curves, it's eroding that bank a lot. And that'll be generally be pretty deep. But on either side of that deep spot, that's exactly where that trail is generally going to be. A lot of times you can see that on a map. I mean, if you're just, like, sometimes I'll just go down a river, like that's, a piece of public, and I'll just go along the river, and I'll go to a dry year or something, and I'll pick out every little crossing that's on there, and I'll just mark that. And then I can go back and scout those areas and see, or walking in, I can see if there's big buck tracks going across it, whatever it may be. Those crossings are really helpful. I mean, that's really, really important, I think.
Yeah, so I guess if you're walking in, if you're hunting a brand new area, new lease or public land or whatever, it seems like an easy place to start is just find the creek or pond edge or whatever and just walk that line and find, A, where there might be beds, or B, just where they could be, using that as a travel corridor, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. We always say that bucks love water.
Is that the first place you guys are looking on a map when you're looking at a new piece? Is, I guess you're looking at the access first, but maybe once you find that, all right, where's the water at? So we can, because that's an obvious thing to look for.
Sometimes. Yeah, I mean, if it's a marshy area or if it's an area, lake or has ponds or creeks or rivers, then we definitely pay attention to that. But there's also, we do hunt a lot of rolling timber too, where there's not as much water, where you're dealing with more of that wind-based stuff off of the points and bowls and leading down into ditches. So I wouldn't say that is what we're looking for every single time. It just depends on the area. But water they love it. If it's there and it's secluded, then it's definitely something you need to be paying attention to.
All right. Well, I have one last rabbit trail I wanted to try running down. Something I've noticed you guys do a couple times is wind bumping deer. And I know last year, Aaron, you had success with a muzzleloader and a doe. And I know, Zach, this year I saw a video where you were doing it down in Nebraska. So if you guys could each maybe explain what you were doing with wind bumping, like what the purpose was and how that worked out, that'd be cool. And I guess since it was last year, Aaron, if you can maybe talk about what you guys did there first.
Yeah, in both situations a little different, so this should work out well. Because Zach was wind bumping for a different reason in Nebraska than what we were doing. Well, I mean,
Right.
I guess it was kind of the same reason as well, but he was doing more scouting than we were trying to do, more killing during the late season. When we got set up, late season, Greg and I got in the stand. We had a big bedding area to our north that was long and narrow. And we'd told Zach to come out, about 8 a.m. after an hour or two after daylight, and just kind of let his scent drift down through that bedding area. We're at the south end of that bedding area. Keep in mind it's north wind. So instead of getting a bunch of people just to push that thing to us, Zach just zigzags across the north edge of that bedding area and slowly works his way through that thing, just letting his scent drift down through the bedding. And what that does is it gets those deer, they smell him, and then they take those escape trails on the south edge of the bedding where we're set up. And usually when they leave, they're not leaving, running Mach 10. They're just creeping out of there. They're walking out of that bedding area because they smelled him at the north end of it, and they're just moving. Now, if you go through there with 10 guys, and you're just gomming through there as fast as you can, the deer are going to come busting out the other side of it, flying through there, and it's going to be tough to get a real good, clean, ethical shot at them. So in that situation, Zach just eased his way down through there, and it took him a while to make it just a few hundred yards, just letting his wind drift, and those does did exactly what we hoped they would do. And they came out of the exit trails of the bedding after they smelled him and walked right in front of the stand and gave me a good, clean shot. But he did something a little different in Nebraska.
Yeah. Now on that hunt, that's a great example of you guys being excited over whatever, because it was just a doe, and I know the story behind it is you were really looking to take something with that muzzleloader of yours, but you guys seemed as excited about that doe just because I think big part of it was because the plan worked. So that was really cool to see. It wasn't some big trophy buck, but the excitement between the teamwork and everybody was definitely there on that one.
Oh yeah.
That was probably one of the funnest things we did last year. I mean, we were stoked about that.
And you guys probably
really
passed
fun.
on 100 does during the year, but the fact was that day you were out to get one, and that's what you got. So that was pretty cool.
Oh yeah, it was awesome, and to have just a good clean kill with that gun was pretty cool because. Yeah, we turkey hunted with it. Well, Aaron turkey hunted with it. I was filming him the year prior, and he had a lot of misses with it. But so
I didn't think that thing was going to go off at all.
And that was,
it was like 3 degrees, but it went off.
All right, Zach. So what were you doing in Nebraska with the wind bumping?
Well, in Nebraska we didn't have a lot of. Obviously, we hadn't pre-scouted anything. When we were just trying to find where the bucks were. And by doing that, we were doing a lot of still hunting and just covering ground, observing. But one of the things that we started doing was wind bumping. And our hope with wind bumping was it was basically just to find bucks and find some deer and make sure that deer were bedding in these areas. And in the spot where we actually shot that buck, we had wind bumped it 2 days prior. So, is that right? We'd wind bumped it, and then we waited a day, and then we went in and hunted it, and then we killed him the day after that. So I guess it was 2 days between wind bumping, 2 full days. So anyway, we went in, and I was walking, wind at my back, just zigzagging slowly through this bedding area, and it was a pretty windy day. And Jake and Brody, the guys that I was hunting with, were on the other side, set up on where two fence rows connected. And we were just hoping that those deer would try to escape and stay tight to that cover. Well, I got back to the back corner of it, and I probably was only 30 yards from the buck. Buck jumps out and runs, and it didn't go the way I expected him to at all. But upon doing that, I was able to get right in there and look exactly where he was bedded, and then look at a number of other beds that were in that thicket, and basically speed scouted it and got right in there, looked at the beds, looked to see what they could see, which wasn't much because it was such a thick area. But I knew then, by going through that thing, a couple places that we could potentially set up based on the wind, and obviously knew which wind that buck was bedded there on, which was the south wind. So a couple days, or we let it have a break, went in there and hunted it the next morning and evening. There was deer back in that bedding area. I remember specifically watching every single time I was in there. The day I wind bumped, I bumped a spike out of a specific little willow patch. The day that we went in there that morning, the first day we went back in there, watched that same spike go right to that same bed. The next morning, saw that same spike go right back to that same bed, and then killed that buck. But that was really encouraging, and that's what kept us going back there, was knowing that those same deer that I spooked out of there were right back in that bedding area. They felt confident enough in those beds that they were going to go back to that area. And it was just a little overlooked piece, but by doing that wind bump, we're able to get in there and scout that area and know that there were deer in there. It's obviously a place people have driven past. I mean, it's right at the entry of that piece of public land. You have to drive by it to get into that public land. But, it's just an easy place to overlook, and we almost did overlook it. But because of that wind bump, we knew that we were able to get in there, and bucks were going to bed in there for sure.
Was that, was there a lot of like limited cover there where it would, keep them coming back there as well? There just weren't a lot of choices for the bucks?
No, across the road, 200 yards away, it was a closed area. You couldn't hunt there. So they very well could have went right back over there.
Yeah.
To the closed area. So they just felt confident enough right there that, that's where they wanted to be. Now there were specific pockets that were bedding habitat, but like I said, one side in one 300-yard direction, there was private land with the same stuff on it, more or less. And then on the other side of the road, it was closed. It was just a tiny little, maybe 10-acre thicket that was just a small block of public, and that's where those deer were. Now, yeah, I mean, like I said, that there's other two right on the other side of that area. There's the same exact habitat. So it wasn't like they didn't have other choices, I guess.
Right. Yeah. That's cool. Well, yeah, I know I said this was cool. Going to be last rabbit trail, but I do have one more. A lot of this is what I would consider, real aggressive tactics that you're taking on public land, and basically you have lots of places to hunt where you're, not necessarily worried about burning one spot out because you kind of move on to the next one. How would you guys adjust your tactics? I know Bill with Midwest Whitetail is all about very low pressure and staying on the outside, and you guys are kind of the opposite with going in. How would you hunt something like if somebody's got some private land and say they've got only 200 acres to hunt? How would you adjust the tactics we're talking about for somebody like that?
Well, there's actually a lot of guys on the hunting beast that hunt private land. They're not all just public guys also. And you'll hear Dan talk about Andre a lot. Andre has got a fairly good sized farm, I think, and it's 700 or 800 acres, and he uses these same tactics, and he kills bucks systematically, like a machine. And it's because you understanding those bedding areas within each piece of property, doesn't matter public or private, you're going to know where, when you get pictures of a buck, you know, and you're relating that to the direction that he's coming from, you're going to know better of where he's bedded and which wind direction he's bedded there on. So anyway, getting back to your question, 200 acres, for instance, if it's a more open piece, I would maybe run trail cameras around the fringes. You'd scout the whole thing in the off season, ideally, you know, in springtime. You'd walk the entire thing. You'd mark everything, no different. And then you'd run cameras around the edges looking for bucks coming in and out of those areas, you know. Or you would sit observation. We were just doing that the other night with Colton. They've got a 150-acre piece of private land that they're hunting with, bumping those bucks out of that draw. So what they're doing is sitting observation back away from that draw, trying to spot one of their bucks coming out of it on a specific wind, and then moving in for the kill immediately. So they're going to see a buck do something. He's going to come out of this draw, go into alfalfa or acorns or whatever, and then move in on him and try to kill him under the same conditions the very next day. So nothing's really changing that much, except you're picking and choosing your battles a little bit more carefully. You know, you're waiting for that exact scenario that you need to get in and hunt one of those specific bedding areas. You can't just kind of make do or make something work, because if you bump him off of there, he may run 100 yards and bed on the neighbor's land for the next 2 weeks. But you don't know that really until you try. I guess you're being cautiously aggressive. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thinking is you're better off being aggressive enough to go and get them than just kind of give them a free pass all season because you don't want to move in on them. You know.
No, I mean, so many
chance.
people get nocturnal or whatever. I hate that word, but they get they get pictures of bucks in the middle of the night, and then they say, "Oh, you know, he's nocturnal. He's just under the ground all day, and then at 10 o'clock, you know, he decides to rise from the earth." No, that's not how these things work. We've seen several of them in their bedding areas. Like tonight, for instance. I mean, it's 75 degrees. There's nothing special about tonight's weather whatsoever up here. And that buck that I watched got out of his bed. He was up moving at an hour before dark. He just only made it about 100 yards.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the biggest thing. And there were some fresh scrapes up on the ridge that I was walking in on that was probably 500 yards from that bedding area. And I bet you if you put a camera over those scrapes, you're going to pick up that buck that I saw, because he was headed that general direction.
But probably
you're not going to get right 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. You're not in the game. He's not bedding close by right there. Now you might be able to kill him in the rut, making a circuit through there looking for does or something. But yeah, I think a lot of folks that don't understand the bedding tactics will just deduce that to bucks being nocturnal. And when you look at, the funny thing is, like with Winky's farm, a lot of those bucks that he's killed in the last few years that he's calling daylight movers or whatever, most of those bucks are actually bedded really close to that spot where he's getting pictures of them in daylight. They're bedded within 100, 150 yards. And he's killing them on those little plots that are right next to bedding. And he's associating them with being daylight movers when, in fact, I mean, this is just my opinion, they aren't necessarily daylight movers. They're just bedding really close to that camera location.
It does seem like it's becoming a lot more popular building, smaller micro plots that are supposed to be, kill plots on the way to larger sources. And a lot of these smaller plots are like further in the timber. It's not just on Bill's farm, but I'm hearing a lot of that, on a lot of these big farms that people have. And it does seem like they're just kind of moving in closer to bedding is kind of what the strategy is. And they're picking specific, basically specific weather days or whatever to go in there and get them. But Yeah, that is a good point you make of as far as moving in closer to where they're going to be bedding.
One of the things that I want to add to this is you can hunt the fringes all you want, but every time you go in there, you leave scent on the ground, and all that's going to do is push that buck further back towards his bed in daylight. He's not magically just going to get up and come closer to that ground scent the next day. To me, the idea of that is doing nothing but putting extra pressure on an area.
Yeah, and usually that's what happens.
You're in turn just pushing that deer further into his quote unquote nocturnal state just by letting him know, hey, I'm hunting you, but I'm hunting you all the way out here, so just don't show up here don't show up here in daylight. That's my theory on it, and I've definitely, right. I've definitely done it myself. Don't get me wrong, but to continually do it is just wasting time, in my opinion.
Yeah. Infault has the same theory as well, and it makes total sense. Because I've done it. I sat there and ran cameras every week, and walked in there to those areas and tried to wear, scent-free boots and spray down with all this stuff and whatever. That's the fact. If you set up a trail camera and you gom around in front of the thing in the woods, I don't care what you do. You go look at those first few days worth of pictures, and the first mature doe that comes up to that camera is going to stand there in front of it and stare at the camera. What she's doing is she's smelling where you were just walking. She's smelling that ground scent. And some deer react differently to ground scent. Some of them don't care that much at all. Especially deer that have very light pressure on them. They may not care near as much. But to Zach's point, yeah, the people that are actually saying they're being more careful than us are putting more pressure on their deer than we are. That's the thing. A lot of folks get our aggressive strategy kind of confused, but what we do is we go in, we scout an area one time, pick the trees we're going to hunt, and then go in there one time in the fall for the kill, or twice. We might go in and observe and then go in for the kill. So we're actually only going into that area maybe 2-3 times a year, max, not in there all the time. Because those bedding areas are there for a reason, and that's because people don't go there, and people don't leave scent there, and people don't bump the bucks out of there. They're comfortable in those areas, and moving, within that 150, 200-yard bubble of those areas if you stay out of there, and you plan your moves, so to speak.
I kind of have something to add to that that's kind of interesting. I have a big yard in the backyard, and it connects to some timber, and we have deer that come back there in the backyard, and we have a salt lick, and I went to refresh the salt lick, and I went in with rubber boots, sprayed down, and put the salt out. A couple of days later, I noticed these deer, which never act startled at all. They came in acting crazy. They knew something was up. And, this is my backyard. We play football in my backyard. I mow my backyard. We're always in my backyard. But I went in this time with rubber boots on and sprayed down, and these deer just knew something was up. And I thought that was also interesting. It's observation.
Right. Yeah, and we've seen the same thing. I don't know. I used to wear all that stuff, and Zach can go on for days about scent control. But we as a whole don't believe in any of it. We are fascinated with wind currents, and how that plays out in every single scenario. And we do try to minimize ground scent to a certain degree, but it's so hard to do. As far as the rest of that stuff goes, yeah. As far as the rest of that stuff goes, maybe some of it works. I haven't seen it ever, but maybe some of it works. I'll give it the benefit of the doubt, but we just don't have time to mess with it. We got too much other stuff that we're worried about, and you could go to all these different steps, but it's a lot of work to do all that stuff. And to not know whether or not you're actually benefiting from it or not. Our time, I guess, we feel is just spent more valuably elsewhere. than worrying about how we smell.
It seems like you guys are not too worried about camo either. I guess I would say as a whole, I was just watching one of your videos with Scott Pruka, and he's up hunting with the Iowa Hawkeye sweatshirt on in the video.
Yep.
So I guess if you don't have sponsors that you have to wear their camo, I guess you wear whatever you want to the stand, huh?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I've been wearing Realtree for a long time. I grew up watching Realtree Monster Bucks videos, so I mean, I'm sitting here in my Realtree camo pants right now, as a matter of fact, that I wore out there tonight. Sitting on the, getting ready to eat dinner in these things. I don't care.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I know some of the people there that are associated with that brand, and it's a great brand, and they make great stuff. I mean, but at the same time, we end up out there in our blue jeans sometimes too.
Yeah. Yeah, I obviously there's some merit to it in some situations, but it doesn't seem like it's the end all be all for killing deer.
Yeah, I think it helps sometimes, but it's more like to help you camouflage your setup, or to blend into your background. It won't matter how good the camo is that you're wearing if you're standing, in a toothpick of a tree with no limbs. Everything's going to see you up there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's definitely really important for turkeys. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Adam, it sounds like we're keeping these guys from dinner. You got any last questions? Because I think I'm ready to let them go.
Yeah, I'll give them one last lighthearted question. I heard I remember hearing in one of your YouTube videos that you guys were coming down to the South. Do you have a state picked out to hunt in the South? You going to Mississippi? Where are you going?
I don't know. We thought about going to Mississippi. What do you think, Zach?
I don't know. I haven't thought about it enough yet, but yeah, I mean, we definitely have goals to get down there. We turkey hunted in Mississippi this past year on public, and we thought that it would be a real fun challenge to try to hunt that. So haven't picked one yet, but I know that we've talked about going back to Mississippi.
You might have to get down to Florida for turkey season. Get an Osceola down here.
Yeah, I've been down there a couple times. It's awesome.
Did you do public or private down here?
Private.
Yeah. Oh, you have to come hit the swamps down here. Hit some public.
Yeah,
land.
that'd be fun. That'd be a blast.
Yeah.
Then when you figure it out, you can show me what to do. All right, guys. Well, I really appreciate all your time tonight. We got a combined between the two of you. We got 3 hours out of you, so I appreciate it. What's the best way? I guess maybe just kind of give us the rundown of everything you're doing right now. Social media, YouTube, podcasts. How can people get more of your content?
Just look up The Hunting Public on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. And all the podcasts and stuff are on Podbean and iTunes as well. And they may also be on Stitcher, The Hunting Public.
Oh, and I did want to point one more thing out that I think is really cool. Based on the conversation we just had, I see that you moved a lot of your stuff over from Midwest Whitetail onto your, it was you guys doing the podcast. And I just thought it was really cool to hear you explain how those couple interviews had really changed the way you're thinking. And basically anybody can go back and listen to those same interviews and kind of hear, how that whole thought process went through. I'm sure you guys have listened.
Yeah, and a lot of those old interviews are also still on MidwestWhitetail.com.
Okay.
And, Bill still has those podcasts up there. They can listen to them there as well.
That's pretty cool.
We actually, sometimes or at least I go back and laugh and just think about how, naive we were to this whole thing. Once we heard somebody talk about it, it was like, man, that makes a lot of sense. But at the time, we just found pretty, it's funny to listen to, the things that we were so interested in and we didn't have a clue. Some things we just really sounded very naive in those interviews, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, but the thing is, I think you guys were to be able to pick on to that with just having a couple conversations, it's not like you guys were that far off of it, the way you were thinking.
Right, yeah.
To be ready to accept that as like a new way of doing things. Obviously, you don't hear one person say something, be like, okay, I'm going to start doing that. So you already had like the information in your head. It was just a matter of.
It was a lot of. I
together.
remember like for like, I mean, we still do it, but for just like days nonstop after we talked to Greg and Dan, we would be like, okay, in 2012, northwest wind, saw a buck on this elevation, coming from, had to be a bed right here, and it's just funny that it was a lot of just going back and thinking on specific encounters with specific wind directions and all that, and then that's when it started clicking. It's just going back and looking at those past experiences.
Have you guys been able to go back to any of those like old spots where you'd killed a deer and like go back and try to find where the bedding was based on, thinking about what happened in the past?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like cool. multiple times. All
right, man. Well, thanks a lot for your time again, guys. I really appreciate it. I think we've taken enough of it. Man, maybe after the season's over, we can get together and do this again sometime in the off season. I know you guys have got a lot going on right now, so I appreciate you making a little bit of time for us.
Yeah, no problem. We appreciate you having us on.
Same here, guys. Really appreciate you guys coming on. Have a good night.
Yep, you too. You too.
From a selfish point of view, that was an awesome interview because I got to talk about a lot of the things and hear about a lot of the things that I'm interested about, and that's hunting buck beds, especially in hill country, getting to talk about some island hunting. The questions that I really have around my deer season was answered in a lot of ways, and I really appreciate those guys coming on. What were your thoughts on this interview, Mike?
I think one of the biggest things is I just had fun talking deer hunting with those guys. Obviously, they're coming with a fresh attitude. It's a new venture for them, and just wanted to kind of change the way some things are done in the industry, and I'm really excited about that. And of course, what you said is true about the tactical stuff. I think there's a lot we can learn from them, and just the attitude they have is always learning as well. I think if we all come in with that attitude and take what they said and try to adapt it to how we are. Obviously, we're not all hunting in Iowa, but on the same note, hunting is hunting, and I think there's a lot that they had to say that can really apply. So I'm excited about just kind of keeping that mindset that they talk about of, always scouting, trying to read the sign of what's going on right at that time, and moving close on that bedding.
Yep.
So I didn't tell you we were going to do this. I wanted to add a little segment. Don't know if we're going to always do this, but I'm going to go ahead and read one of these reviews we got on our podcast. I normally am not a big fan of that, but I saw this review and I thought I just had to do it. You might have a little idea where I'm going with this, but I'm going to go ahead and read it. It says, this review is by Pile of Aiden Cruz Poop.
Oh, no.
And the title says, LOL, read this. The review says, it was stupid and you should unsubscribe. If there was a -5 rating, I'd do it. Then it says, by the way, it's me, Adam Cruz's son, Aiden, LOL. What's going on there, man?
Oh, I read an article the other day about how you shouldn't give your teenagers cell phones. Well, you definitely shouldn't give your 10-year-old access to a cell phone. That's all I got to say. I was so mad, but hey, you know what? I haven't even addressed it with him. I'm going to wait till I'm a little calmer.
Maybe he's going to listen to this first and he's going to be famous. You think he gets his friends at school to listen to this?
I'm surprised he's not like really tore up about hunting or anything, but he listens to our podcast. So I think that's pretty good support from a little guy.
Well, despite him saying he'd give it a -5, he did give us a 5-star. So
his jokes are about as good as mine.
Thank you for that, Aiden. Yeah. We have gotten a lot more reviews lately, though. So like we've said 100 times before, I don't want to keep drilling it into everybody. Please review, and thanks for those that have been doing it. I also want to mention real quick hunting gear deals. Please keep going to that website. Support that. That's how I explained to my wife that I'm doing this podcast for, to support the business that I don't really make any money on. So yeah, help a brother out. Please use the site, and also make sure you use my links when you buy some stuff. Despite me not making a lot of money on it, it is growing. It's going the direction I need it to go, and that's thanks to, I'm sure, guys and gals like you that are using it. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
What else is up? We got to close this thing up.
Man, I've got nothing else. That's all I have.
Okay.
I think we've been on here for like 2 or 3 hours.
I know this is a long podcast. I did have a good suggestion for a new tagline, and I think we've kind of settled on something else, but I do think it's a really good point. It's leave it better than you found it. I think we can all do that the next time we go hunting. Let's leave the woods better than we found it. And other than that, we're out down south.
Out down south.